Hey guys, welcome to yet another session by Scalar, and in this particular session we're going to look into what are the backend developer skills you must have as a backend engineer, right? So now, before we move on to this particular session, please make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our upcoming videos, and also leave a like if you enjoy our content. Now, also, if you have any queries, leave a comment down below in the comment section, and we would love to help you out. So now let's understand what will be covered in this session. But before we do that, there is an interview with blog linked in the description box below, which is a textual reference for what exactly is covered in this particular session. If you want to read then watch the video, you can go ahead and see that. Or once this video is completed, you can go ahead and read that particular blog in order to get even more insights, right? So now, first let's understand what exactly will be covered in this particular session. First of all, we'll be looking into what is backend development. We'll be understanding what exactly is backend development. Once that is done, the skills required for a backend developer. Okay, and then we'll understand why exactly are backend developers in demand. And then we'll be looking into what exactly is the role of a backend developer and the responsibilities a backend developer has in a company. And that would be the last part of the session. We'll be understanding everything related to that and learn and discuss more about the skills required for the backend developer. So without any delays, guys, let's begin with the session and understand them.
So guys, let's start with this particular session. So before understanding the backend developer skills, let me just take you through something and then let's start understanding it. So for example, let's say this is a Scalar website. So there is a form over here. So you enter your email ID, you enter your experience, your graduation, your mobile number, and so everything will be done. You would be done with the password once you get the OTP. Okay. So now everything is provided. Then you click on continue booking live class. So you click on continue booking live class, which is a button. So what exactly happens once you click on that button? Where does the data you entered go? Where does it go? Where is it stored? How exactly that particular logic works, and how exactly your live class gets booked? So your data goes somewhere, but there should be something else happening in order to book you into a live class and send you an email in order to join that particular live class, right? So how exactly this particular process works? So is there a system behind this? Yes, there is absolutely a system behind this. That's exactly backend. So that's what we're going to learn about. So first let's understand what exactly is backend development and then move on. So backend development, it can also be said as or known as server-side development. So it basically is, it has everything that the users don't see and contains behind the scenes activities that occur when performing any actions on the website. Databases, backend logic, APIs, servers, anything behind the scene would be server-side development or backend development. For example, what can you see? You can see the website. You can see the website. You can see all of this information. You can see this form. You can see this tiny button over here. So all of this is front end. So when you click on this, when you click on this, it opens up a pop-up. So it is basically a component within the website. Again, that pop-up is also what? It also comes under front end. But what comes in the backend is what exactly happens when you click on certain buttons. For example, when you click on login, it will take you to another page. You again put in your information and you log in. So when you put in your credentials and click on login, something will happen in the backend in order to authenticate you into the website, right? So that exactly again comes under backend development because you do not know what exactly goes behind the scenes, but you know you have been logged in, right? So that's exactly backend. And backend of a website is a combination of servers, applications, and databases. So why would you need a server? So the server will basically have the code which is basically required for the website to run. And the applications are smaller fragments of your application, smaller features. So basically all of that will be available. So, and again, there would be database servers as well. And databases are required for what? When you enter this information and click on continue booking live class, this particular button, your data, first of all, there would be a code in server side, so that code will run. So what exactly will that code do? It will basically push these information into a database and your information will get stored in a database. So now once it is stored in a database, now there will be another business logic which will basically, it will have your mobile number, right? So you will basically get email to the provided email ID. So your email is already in the database. So now the code will automatically take that email ID and basically send you an automated email to your mail, which will have the booking of a free class. So this is basically, this could be done via code, right? So that process is basically backend development, and that's what they're saying over here. So code written by backend developers help process in communicating with the databases and store data into the database. So you enter the data, so the front-end developers create those forms. You are able to enter the data and click on the button, but the data won't get stored in the database. That's where backend developers come into play. They write server-side code which will help this particular data which is being entered to basically store it into a database. So and then you can so by using backend developers code, you will be able to read the data back from the database, update the data, delete the data. You can also how to say, alter the data. You can do various things with server-side coding. So all of this code is written by backend developers, and this is exactly what backend development is. Okay, so now coming to the skills part, which is exactly this particular session is about. So for a backend developer, the main skills, so there is a backend developer will basically have to know all of these things. So servers, knowledge on servers, knowledge on databases, knowledge on programming language, which is really, really important, which is one of the most essential skills, and APIs, application programming interfaces. So now talking about programming languages, so even though programming languages are must, Java or Python or something, under programming languages, you will also have to know two things: algorithms and data structures. So data structures and algorithms, DSA. So this you will have to know, which is very, very basic for all developers, right? So data structures and algorithms, you'll have to be thorough in. And then comes the programming language. Okay, so now let's look into all of these skills in detail. Let's start with programming languages. So to start with, there are essentially two types of programming languages: object-oriented and functional. So object-oriented programming language, it's an architecture built upon the concepts of classes and objects. So you would have heard classes and objects in a lot of places. So object-oriented is built on that, and functional is basically built on everything. So basically mathematical functions. So you have multiple functions layered together. So it is a structured language which has multiple functions which can execute in any order it wants to. So that's basically functional. Now let's look at object oriented. So it is used to structure a programming language, program into a simple reusable pieces of code which are classes. So you can create multiple classes, and let's say you don't have to rewrite a particular set of code. If you are creating a class, this particular class, the job of this particular class is to write. I'll take this example again. So the class, let's say the class's name is enter data. So this particular class enter data, the only purpose of this particular class is to enter the data which is entered in this particular form into the database, right? So now whenever you want data to be like inserted into the database, you can reuse that particular class, right? So that's exactly how classes and objects work. So you can create these code snippets which could be recalled by creating instances of them which are called objects. So you have classes, and these classes can be called using objects. So whenever you want to do a particular operation, you call the relevant object which will run the code within the class, which will give you the expected result. So this is basically object-oriented programming. So now some of the most popular object-oriented programming languages are Python, Java, and .NET. So .NET is a framework, it's not a programming language. Under .NET there is C Sharp, VB.NET, there is F Sharp. So there are multiple programming languages which you can go ahead with, but C Sharp, .NET, which is the most popular language in .NET. Next comes functional programming languages. As I already told you, everything is bound in mathematical functions. So it's basically a development by creating pure functions. So it's avoid concepts of state and mutable data that is observed in OOPS. So in OOPS you will be able to do that, but in functional you won't be able to do that. So one of the simpler examples, apart from Haskell, Clojure, SQL, and R, uh, in this case functional will have a structure. So classes, you can reuse them. In function, it'll have a structure in a single piece of code, but in this particular structure, right, what exactly happens, there will be multiple functions. So these functions doesn't have to be executed in the same order. They can be executed in any order, but at the end the code will work. So that's exactly functions, because one function can call another function, the other function can call another function, and it can go ahead like that. So these are the two different types of languages. These are not individual languages. Now within these, let's look at individual languages which you can learn as programming for a backend programming language. So you can choose any language you want if you are a backend developer who wants to be a backend developer who is watching this particular video. I'm going to give you an intro on PHP, Python, Ruby, Java, and .NET. So these are the five languages which I'm going to talk about right now. You can choose any language you want. First of all, PHP. It's called hypertext preprocessor. So that's basically the name of it. The PHP, even though there's a P in the front, you can ignore that. It's basically hypertext preprocessor. That's basically what PHP is. It's an open source backend scripting language. You can build dynamic websites using it. So even right now, even though PHP is having a bad reputation of its complexity in terms of creating a lots of files and it gets a little hectic. So in this case, even that's the case, 78% of dynamic websites are still using PHP. PHP is still in their tech stack. That's because PHP was heavily used back then, and it'll be really, really hard in order to replace all of PHP's code with another set of code. So obviously, PHP is still there. And one of the advantages of PHP is that it's very, very easy to learn. Even I've learned PHP. It wasn't a pretty hard language to learn. It's dynamically typed. It reports fewer errors. So that basically means you can easily compile and run a program until you identify the problematic part. Okay, so even when there's a problematic part, it will be shown in the browser when you're running the compiling the code and running it. There are lots of resources because it's a very old language. There's a huge community who uses PHP, and there are lots of people in the community who can support you with whatever doubts you have. And so this is just an example over here. So this is an HTML body. Within that, there's a piece of PHP code, right? So this is how a PHP code starts. Tag question mark PHP closing tag, and this is how it ends, question mark tag. And yeah, so they're basically printing hello world in the console. Define learning, welcome to function my function echo learning. So they are basically calling this particular function. So it will basically write welcome to. So here they're calling my function and $walk2. So this is how you create a variable in PHP. You put a dollar and put the variable name. So date is h, and if $t less than 25, echo prepare for payday. If not, echo have a good night. So basically, this is just a sample code. Do not, please do not make any sense out of this. This is just a sample code to show you how PHP looks. All right. So also companies like Facebook, Lyft, Viber, and Hootsuite, they all still use PHP and they are in their tech stacks. So PHP is one language. Next comes Python, which is a really popular language, which was first created by Guido von Rossum in 91. Python is an interpreted general purpose programming language. It declines the need for coding to a significant level because it has a lot of inbuilt libraries, which is already a piece of code which you can just call, which will run that piece of code for you. So it has high usefulness because of the ease of use and extensive libraries offered for backend development. So many emerging tech companies use Python frameworks. So there are Python frameworks like Django and Flask. So both are web development frameworks using Python. Python is usually, as said, general purpose programming language, which basically means you can use it for any type of development. So Python is used in data science, it's used in machine learning, AI, it's used in web development, it's used in backend development, it can be used as a scripting language. So it's basically an all-rounder. And companies like Uber, Mozilla, Red Hat, and Spotify all use Python. Especially a really a better example would be YouTube, on which you're currently viewing this particular video. You might have searched for this video, but if you haven't searched for this video and if you got this video in your recommendation, that's basically the work of Python. That is basically machine learning's recommendation engine, which uses Python in YouTube's algorithm, which basically has recommended this video according to your viewing history, right? So that's basically one example. Third one is Ruby. So it's a dynamic open source high level programming language, focuses on productivity and simplicity. You can basically create web applications really quick without writing much code. But again, there won't be lots of customizations which you can do with programming languages where you'll have to do everything by yourself. So Ruby on Rails is a web development framework, like how the Django and Flask are web development frameworks of Python. Ruby on Rails is a web development framework in Ruby, and it's basically built on top of Ruby. So it's basically used by lots of companies like Airbnb and Code Academy use Ruby on Rails for their website development, especially backend, not the front end. Even Django and Flask are for mainly for backend, not for front end. Yeah, so next comes Java. Java again is one of the most popular programming languages. Everybody would have heard of Java. If anyway they're close to IT, they would have heard of Java, or even school students would have heard of Java as one of the most popular uh, programming languages, or anybody with an really old Samsung phone would remember Java because games were created using Java. So it's an object-oriented platform independent language, platform independent in the sense. So once you create a code and compile it, so that piece of compiled code, right, bytecode, it can run on any platform. It doesn't matter if it's a Windows operating system or Linux, Mac, it doesn't matter. Once you installed the Java virtual machine, so basically, once you install Java, it can run on any particular machine without having any problem. So that's why it's called platform independence, and that's exactly why it got really, really popular. And it's one of the world's most popular programs. So high convenience, cross-stage capabilities, and security. So security is one of the most important reasons why people go for Java. It's really, really popular among developers. And coming to backend frameworks, Spring Boot is one of the most popular backend framework in Java, which is still being used extensively. Companies like LinkedIn, Flipkart, Amazon, eBay all use Java frameworks, which is Spring Boot. They also use Java for other reasons as well. So yeah, so that's basically Java. So these are some of the popular ones. And finally, let's look into .NET. So .NET is again a web application framework. So you can build websites using languages like C Sharp and VB.NET. VB.NET Visual Basic is not uh, that popular currently. So C Sharp is the one which is currently really, really popular. And it was first developed by Microsoft in response to Oracle's Java programming language. So .NET is a unified one-stop solution for building fast and robust mobile desktop web applications. It is open source and supports all programming languages, including Mac OS, Windows, Linux. So it's basically like Java, but it's just created by Microsoft. As you can read from here, it was developed by Microsoft to basically give out a competitor for the Java programming language. But when it was released, it was not as powerful as Java. But right now, C Sharp is a really, really comfortable language to work with. It's better than Java, I would say. It's much faster, it's much friendlier. Yeah, so basically companies like Stack Overflow and also Microsoft obviously use .NET for their backend. Uh, so we've seen all the programming languages, guys. Let's move on to the next topic, which is knowledge of databases, which is one of the skills which you should have. So as I told you, especially a backend developer's main job would be to make sure the connection between databases and your code is really, really quick. That's the front end and the code. Whenever a customer require basically tries to retrieve some data, or tries to book a class or do anything, any operation, that has to happen like this. Otherwise, they would think the website is quite slow and they wouldn't try to get the same service from you once again. So you should make sure that your code is optimized properly and it works properly. Okay, so there are two types of databases, SQL and SQL and NoSQL. So coming to SQL, so if you see the right side, right? So Oracle, PostgreSQL, MariaDB, MySQL, SAP, SQL Server, IBM DB2, SAP, ASE. So all of these are SQL databases. They are not NoSQL databases. As an example of a NoSQL database, there is MongoDB, there is DynamoDB in AWS. So these are NoSQL databases. So first of all, what is a SQL database? It is where the data is mapped in a table and each one is linked to another in a significant way. SQL databases work on queries and produce the results based on them. So basically, record storage of data in a particular tabular format comes under SQL databases. But in NoSQL databases, there is no need to structure your data because data could be stored in key value pairs and they could be stored like trees. And so it mostly uses JSON. It can also use XML, which is extensible markup language. JSON is basically JavaScript object notation. Most NoSQL databases use JSON because it's much easier and friendlier to go ahead with. Okay, so these are the two different kinds of databases you would have to have a knowledge of. So you don't have to learn every single database. Maybe you might have to learn one from SQL and one from NoSQL. You can learn PostgreSQL and MongoDB. That would be more than enough. So next comes knowledge of APIs. So API basically stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's a medium in which two computer softwares can talk with each other. For example, if you're watching from India, let's say you open a food delivery app, let's call Zomato or Swiggy, and you open them and you basically put in all the information. That is, you select what food you want and you put in your coupon code or whatever, and then there's a pay option and you click pay, right? So let's say you're using Paytm to pay. When you click on pay using Paytm, it'll open up a small window within the app itself in order for you to pay it, right? So what exactly is that? That's basically an API. So that particular API is built in. Zomato is using the Paytm API in order to connect the payment method to its app, and that particular API helps you to pay to Zomato via Paytm without any hassle. So it's basically something which two particular applications can use to communicate with each other. So APIs take a request from the client or a user and send it to the server, which sends back a response based on the request to the user itself. So the user could be so over here you can see user communication through GUI, and they would basically get a response. So computer or client, it's communication through API, server communication through API, so they get a response. So the two recognized positions for API information is JSON and XML. And yeah, so that's basically is APIs. So you would basically have to use APIs extensively as a backend developer. So knowledge of APIs is really important. Okay, now looking at backend developer responsibilities. So there are four main responsibilities for a backend developer. System architecture building. So you will have to create an architecture which is sustainable, scalable in time. For example, there is an application and you are creating a system architecture, and that particular system architecture should be scalable. So let's say right now your customer base is 1,000 and you exactly know how it works and all, but let's say later in the future there are 1 lakh users. So now that's basically a 10x growth, right? Sorry, 1,000 to 1 lakh, which is basically 100x growth. uh, so in this particular case, you should have built an architecture which was scalable by itself. So if it was scalable by itself, then it wouldn't have created any hassle. But if you just created an architecture which could handle 1,000 users at that particular time, when the customer base went to 1 lakh, you would have to redesign the architecture again. So make sure to create a sustainable and scalable architecture at the first itself. Next comes secure data storage. So customer data shouldn't be leaked. Your company's mission critical data shouldn't be leaked, which is stored in your databases. So for that, you should ensure data security. So that is one of the main aspects, which is data security and data storage security, which is for a backend developer. Fourth, web and mobile app backend development. So your company would already have a front end for their mobile application, front end for their website. So you are and they would already have a database in place. But the communication and the way they communicate, how fast they can retrieve information and enter information, all of that will be taken care by you. So that's exactly what backend development is in this case. And payment process configuration. So most companies obviously will have, let's take Amazon in this case. You put a product and buy and try to buy it. So in that case, you're paying something, right? So that payment process configuration, how exactly that payment works. So the payment process should be really secure. So this takes into place security, system architecture design as well, and also the business logic which you use in order to make sure the payment process goes through. So these are some of the most important responsibilities you have as a backend developer. Now there are other responsibilities which we'll just brush through, and this would be the last part of our session which we are learning. So first, coordinate with front-end developers and develop server-side algorithms, which is basically data efficient transfer data efficiently to the client-side web applications. So basically, you are a server. You will write code for server side, but again, there are web applications which run on the client side, right? Which runs on the browser directly. So for those kinds of applications, you should make sure your algorithm is really efficient so that it can efficiently transfer the data. Okay, so next comes cross collaborate with PM, project manager, and QA quality assurance. So you should basically work with project managers and quality assurance engineers to optimize and develop a quality user experience. So you should basically collaborate with multiple teams in order to make sure the business logic, that is the business algorithm you're creating, is up to the mark and which provides your users a really good user experience. And then application should work fast and it should perform better even though the traffic changes. So currently if there are 100 users trying to retrieve information and they're getting it in zero point 0.1 millisecond, and let's say now there are 10,000 users trying to do the same, but in this case, let's say your if your application gets slow, then customers would start uh, to basically hate your product, right? So even if the customer base increases, the architecture should be scalable, which again should make your application should still be working in the same. If the data retrieval speed goes to, let's say, zero point 0.5 milliseconds, that's bad. It should still be zero point 0.1 milliseconds only. Optimize the applications for increasing response time and efficiency. So once you created the algorithms and everything in its place and working properly, next you should be working on the code. How exactly you can uh, i- make the code even more efficient. And then building the architecture of the system, keeping, as I told you, scalability, speed, and stability of the applications. So speed of retrieval and entering data, one, scalability, whenever there's an increase in the customers or decrease in the customers, how exactly you will handle it. And finally, stability. The application should be always stable and available. It shouldn't crash at any particular moment because of a fault in the code. Then security structures and their best practices. As I told you, securing the data and the code is really, really important. So that's what covered in here. And then finally, writing reusable code and libraries for future implementation. So you should basically write code which is reusable, which can be used in another place, which has an exact same functionality. You can just make few tweaks, but if you create code which is not reusable, you just create it for that particular aspect. In that case, it's not really good code, right? Because you can't use it in other places. It's better to write reusable code and libraries which you can use later in the future, which would also be hugely time saving in the future, and it would be much more helpful. So these are basically the backend developer responsibilities. I hope everything is clear in this case. And that's exactly what backend development is. These are the skills you will have to know. To summarize it, you should have backend programming language knowledges. That is, you will have to select one or two programming languages and be really good at it. Next, knowledge of databases. Take one NoSQL database and take one SQL database and be good at it. APIs, be good at it. Backend developer responsibilities. So these would be your responsibilities. And also one more thing which I forgot to cover, which would be servers. So you should be able to create servers. You should be able to uh, make sure everything is in place. For example, you should be able to create a server on AWS or Azure and basically run your backend code on that. You should be able to create a server on premises. You should be able to handle the increase in servers, decrease in servers. That's basically the scalability aspect. So all of this should be taken care by you. Okay, so this is basically backend developer skills. So I hope everything is clear. So thank you. Meet you in another session.